The cave smells like wet stone and old smoke. Somewhere outside, in the dark, something is breathing that isn't human. It's cold enough that you can see your own breath by the fire, and 20 feet from the entrance, low to the ground, 2 eyes are watching the flames. Not attacking, not running, just watching, waiting for someone to drop a bone. You don't have a phone in your pocket right now. You don't have a lock on your door. There's no group chat warning you what's outside. No doorbell camera, no 911. There's just you, a fire, and an animal built to kill things twice your size, sitting close enough to smell your food and deciding, for reasons nobody fully understands even today, not to. That decision, made somewhere between 40,000 and 14,000 years ago, in a place we still can't pin on a map, is the reason a dog is probably in the room with you right now, or the reason your neighbor has one barking through the wall. Every leash, every dog park, every "who's a good boy" traces back to a moment we've mythologized into something clean and simple, and it's mostly wrong. Here's the thesis. Dogs didn't happen because wolves wanted to be pets. Something colder was going on, and the cleaned-up version they teach you skips the part that actually explains why it worked. So here's what you've probably heard. Wolves started hanging around ancient trash heaps. The nervous ones fled. The bold ones stayed and got fed. Generation after generation, the calm ones kept coming back, kept breeding with each other, and eventually you get something that looks less like a wolf and more like a dog. Humans didn't even try. The wolves basically domesticated themselves, and humans just showed up for the ending. It's a nice story. It's also missing a body, because here's the problem. For that story to be true, you need a before wolf, a specific population that scientists can point to and say, that's the one, that's the ancestor. In 2022, a team led by geneticist Pontus Skoglund pulled together ancient wolf genomes from 66 sites across 16 countries, the biggest wolf ancestry map ever built, specifically to find that ancestor. And after all that work, none of the wolves they tested turned out to be a close match. The actual population that gave rise to dogs still hasn't been found. It might be extinct, it might be buried somewhere nobody's dug yet, which means the wolf you're picturing in your head right now, skulking near a trash pile waiting to get tame, we don't actually have proof that specific wolf ever existed the way the story describes it. So what actually happened? Who's been quietly wrong for decades? And why does any of this matter to you, sitting wherever you're sitting right now, possibly with a dog snoring somewhere nearby? Let's go beat by beat, because each one gets weirder than the last. For a long time, the oldest known dog in the world was a puppy. In 2019, near Yakutsk in Siberia, a place so cold your eyelashes freeze solid in winter, researchers pulled a perfectly preserved 18,000-year-old puppy out of the permafrost. Fur intact, teeth intact. Internet headlines called it the oldest dog ever found. Scientists were excited. It fit the story perfectly. Then they ran the full genome. And it wasn't a dog. It was a wolf. Let that sit for a second. An animal frozen in ice for 18,000 years, preserved well enough to study in detail, and the species identification was still wrong until the DNA came back. If we can misidentify something sitting right in front of us, in a lab with modern genetic tools, how confident should we really be about a clean domestication timeline built on much older, much more fragmented bones? Here's a location problem, and it's a big one. Ask 5 different research teams where dogs came from, and you'll get 5 different answers, pointing at 5 different spots on a map. Some genetic studies of modern dog breeds point to East Asia. Other archaeological and genetic evidence points to Siberia. Others say the Middle East or Western Europe, or some combination of all of them happening at slightly different times. There's a phrase one researcher used that stuck with people, something like, "There's been a lot of pins put on this map. Everybody's got a theory. Nobody's agreeing on the pin." That's not a small gap. That's the difference between dogs coming from one origin story that everyone shares versus multiple independent groups of humans in completely different parts of the world, separately deciding to let a top predator move into their camp. Money, pride, paranoia, those are the usual reasons humans repeat the same mistake in different places. Turns out survival works the same way. Different continents, same weird decision. And then there's the one that actually breaks the self-domestication story wide open. The one most documentaries skip because it's less tidy. There's a second theory floating around in the research, and it doesn't get nearly the airtime the trash heap story gets. Cross-species adoption. Instead of bold wolves creeping toward humans on their own initiative, some researchers argue it went the other way. Humans found wolf pups, maybe after killing a mother wolf during a hunt, maybe finding an abandoned den, and instead of leaving them, they took them back to camp, nursed them, fed them by hand, let them grow up inside the group instead of outside it, which is completely wild if you actually sit with it, because it means the origin of man's best friend might not be a story about wolves being clever opportunists. It might be a story about grief, or curiosity, or some ancient hunter-gatherer looking at an orphaned pup and just not being able to walk away. That's not commensalism. That's something closer to compassion, or maybe just boredom, twisted through 10,000 generations into a golden retriever falling asleep on your couch. And that's before you even get to the timeline itself getting rewritten under our feet. In March of 2026, 2 studies published in Nature used ancient DNA pulled from fossil dog bones, over 200 sets of remains from sites across Europe, Southwest Asia, and the Iranian Plateau, to push the confirmed split between wolves and dogs back by more than 3,000 years. The oldest confirmed dog in that data comes from a cave called Kesserloch in Switzerland, dated to roughly 14,200 years ago. That's not a rounding error. That's an entire chunk of prehistory that got added onto the story in the last few months, which means the settled science you might have learned even a couple years ago is already outdated. Here's the 3-word gut punch version. We keep guessing wrong. Now, here's the pivot, because none of this actually explains why getting friendly with humans turned a wolf into a dog in the first place. For that, you need to leave the caves entirely and go somewhere that has nothing to do with prehistory. You need to go to a fox farm outside Novosibirsk in the middle of Soviet Russia in 1959. A geneticist named Dmitry Belyaev wanted to understand domestication, but he didn't have 10,000 years to wait around. So he ran an experiment. He took silver foxes, wild, aggressive, farmed for their fur, absolutely not pets, and bred them for exactly one trait. Not intelligence, not size, not coat color, just calmness. Every generation, he tested how the foxes reacted to a human hand reaching toward the cage, and only bred the ones that stayed relaxed instead of snapping or fleeing. Within a few generations, something happened that nobody selected for. The calm foxes started developing floppy ears, curly, wagging tails, patchy white and brown coats instead of solid silver. Some even started barking. None of that was the goal. The only thing Belyaev bred for was doesn't panic around people, and the animal's entire body plan started shifting anyway, because it turns out the biological system that controls fear and stress hormones is wired into the same developmental pathway that controls ear cartilage, tail muscles, and pigment. Slam those two worlds together, and here's the pattern. Whatever happened in that cave near that fire 10 or 40,000 years ago wasn't really about wolves getting smarter or friendlier as a personality upgrade. It was a biological chain reaction. Selecting for one narrow thing, tolerance of humans, triggered a cascade that reshaped an entire species' skull shape, hormone levels, coat pattern, even brain chemistry as an accidental side effect. Dogs don't have floppy ears and wagging tails because it's cute. They have them because calmness and physical softness are, biologically, downstream of the exact same switch. That's the shareable shock fact. Your dog's floppy ears exist for basically the same genetic reason a Soviet fox farm accidentally created tame, barking, patchy foxes in under a decade. Nobody was trying to make them look friendlier. It just happened. Because evolution doesn't do neat, isolated upgrades. It drags 100 other traits along for the ride. Now here's where it gets uncomfortable, because this isn't just a story about animals anymore. Think about which wolves actually survived that transition and which ones didn't. The bold, curious, slightly too trusting wolf that walked toward a human campfire took an enormous gamble. Get it right, and you and your descendants get fed forever, protected, bred, spread across the entire planet inside human households. Get it wrong, and a hunter-gatherer with a spear ends your bloodline on the spot for the crime of getting too close. There was no middle ground and no do-over. Meanwhile, the cautious wolf, the one that stayed in the tree line, kept its distance, played it safe by every survival instinct evolution had given it for millions of years. That wolf's bloodline is largely extinct, wiped out. Not because it did anything wrong, because the rules of the game had quietly changed, and staying correctly wild in a world reshaping itself around human settlements turned out to be the losing strategy. Same species, same instincts, same starting conditions. One lineage took a terrifying risk near a fire, and it paid off across 10,000 years, ending in literally every household dog on the planet today. The other lineage did everything right by ancient standards and got erased. That's not really a nature documentary plot. That's just how power and proximity work. Get close to the thing that controls resources, or get left behind by history, regardless of which choice was actually smarter in a vacuum. Which brings you back to that cave, back to the fire, the smoke, the eyes watching from the dark, deciding whether to stay or run. You're not in a cave right now, but you're doing a version of the exact same calculation, probably every single day, without noticing it. Every time you decide to trust a stranger a little more because they seem calm and unthreatening. Every time an algorithm decides you're safe to advertise to, or safe to keep on a platform, because you behave in ways it can predict and tolerate. Every workplace, every social circle, every online space is quietly running the same filter that fire ran 40,000 years ago. Who gets to stay close, and who gets pushed back into the dark? We like to think we've evolved past that instinct. We just changed the shape of the fire. The wolf that won wasn't the strongest. It wasn't even the smartest. It was the one that correctly guessed which risk was worth taking at exactly the right moment, near exactly the right fire. So here's the actual question worth sitting with, and it's not really about dogs at all. In your own life, right now, are you the wolf that's staying safely in the tree line, or the one willing to walk toward the fire, even though you have no proof yet that it's going to end well? Drop your answer in the comments. I actually want to know.